We came out of the Mar-a-Lago summit with very high hopes.
This is all coded.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, October 9th, 2018. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Deputy Editor of New York Magazine, David Wallace Wells. On the latest IPCC report and how the end of the world has become old news. Meanwhile, Nikki Haley resigns. No one knows why. Brett Kavanaugh's regime begins on the Supreme Court as Blasey Ford still in hiding. Sympathies, of course, to Brett Kavanaugh. Massive data breach shutters Google Plus. And Trump's enormous money laundering and tax scams revealed yet again. Question remains, why has it taken so long? Bless you. Meanwhile, the Trump administration pretending to be concerned about a missing Saudi journalist. And Florida braces for Hurricane Michael. It is the last day to register in 15 states in the country. If somehow you are not registered to vote at this point, don't be an idiot. Go register to vote. I hope that was gentle enough. Taylor Swift has broken conservative hearts and surged voter registration. Yeah. And Bernie on a massive midterm tour, 21 states. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. It is Tuesday. Thank you for the kind emails about the interview yesterday. I'm glad folks liked it. Carol Anderson is a fascinating writer, and I think, particularly in this era, again, I said this yesterday, but there's two dynamics to Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, which is not to say that he's the only person like this, but he is the final piece in the puzzle, and that is basically diminishing the rights of, I don't want to say the marginalized, because it's actually sort of a little bit larger segment of the population than that, but of a significant number of, or, broadly speaking, the, half the country in one form or another, and then increasing the rights of corporations. It comes up even today in the context of our the interview we'll do about this IPCC report. Brett Kavanaugh, and I'll touch on this with David Wallace Wells, but Brett Kavanaugh wrote the opinion in a case as to the EPA's ability to regulate hydrofluorocarbons, I think it is, in the context of global warming. And understand, we've talked about this in the past, but this is really important. This is where the Chevron doctrine comes in. When Congress writes a statute, they don't necessarily know the science behind, and I'm talking in the context of the EPA. They don't necessarily know the science behind it. Maybe science doesn't even know all the science behind it yet. But broadly, it says the EPA can regulate any substance it deems to have implications on the health of individuals. I'm painting with a broad brush, but this is just to illustrate. Now, maybe at the time that they're writing this law, they don't know that hydrofluorocarbons are implicated in global warming. And at the time the statute's written, those chemicals are not a threat to human life, human existence. So the agency needs to have some latitude to make those determinations, to be aware of new science, et cetera, et cetera. Well, Brett Kavanaugh said, no, that's an overreach. That was the Chevron doctrine, incidentally, that the courts are to defer to the agency's expertise. Brett Kavanaugh said, no. That case was appealed from the D.C. Circuit, the second most important court in the land, and the Supreme Court rejected a bid to review that Kavanaugh authored appeals court ruling just this morning. So now that needs 4 justices to certify, something to be taken a look. It's unclear to me who looked at it. It doesn't necessarily mean that all 4 liberal justices rejected it, or they may have just decided, we don't want this to come up right now. But this is just an indication of where we're headed. This is just the beginning, folks, and we'll talk more about that as we go. In the meantime, we've lost another one, folks. Nikki Haley has resigned from the Trump administration as UN ambassador, and it is unclear at this point why she has. There is reporting that this is an indication that Pompeo and Bolton have won the day. It may mean she's not belligerent enough at the UN. Hard to believe. She disagreed with them in regards to how many refugees we should let into this country. I certainly don't want to make it seem like she's a reasonable individual. It's just that she's in a room with some full-on lunatics, and so it makes her look slightly better. Although the ease in which she lies and the weirdness in which she she identifies herself is a little bit strange. Here she is speaking to the press in announcing her resignation, sitting next to Donald Trump.
It has been an honor of a lifetime. I said I am such a lucky girl to have been able to lead the state that raised me.
Now, I find that if I would to refer to a 45-some-odd-year-old woman who is the ambassador to the United Nations as a girl,
she's a lucky girl.
I mean, honestly, it's just bizarre.
That's what Daddy Trump likes. She's being folksy.
I guess so.
Come sit on my lap.
Is it really? Are you really too much? I guess in the wake of what went on with Kavanaugh, you don't want to get too pushy, right? Refer to yourself as a woman. I mean, can you imagine if a 45-year-old man was resigning from the UN and saying, I have always found myself to be such a lucky boy?
You know what? Actually, I can.
Really?
Are you familiar with the large sons concept, Sam?
I am not.
Large adult sons. So it's basically like the Trump boys. They're adult men, but they don't have any sense of responsibility. So Kavanaugh was being a bit of a large son.
I see.
It's kind of the same
Did he
principle.
say, we'll go to his acceptance speech and just say, I'm one of the luckiest boys in the world?
It's kind of the same principle by which a 12-year-old black kid is a terrifying criminal who deserves to be killed on sight, while a 60-year-old white man is just, he's just a boy.
I just don't
Can't blame him for anything.
That may be the case that in his mind, but I just don't think that they would refer to themselves as a boy. But continue.
It has been an honor of a lifetime. I said I am such a lucky girl to have been able to lead the state that raised me and to serve a country I love so very much has really been a blessing, and I want to thank you for that. But I'm most excited. Look at the 2 years. Look at what has happened in 2 years with the United States on foreign policy. Now, the United States is respected. Countries may not like what we do, but they respect what we do.
Yeah, about that. I'm not sure if the ambassador to the UN was at the UN. I guess it was about a week and a half ago, because if she was, she might have seen this.
In less than 2 years, my administration has accomplished more than almost any administration in the history of our country. America's so true. Didn't expect that reaction, but that's okay.
Yes, you can see the teeming respect that they have for our country now. Oh, and also, you may have heard that an American resident, a Saudi journalist, was just killed in an Istanbul embassy, Saudi embassy, because they have so much respect for us. And then, of course, the Chinese basically kidnapped the head of Interpol because of the tremendous respect that in which we're held. And then around the country, of course, I'm sure you've seen the polling where if you measure that as a sign of respect, it is at an all-time low. But the bottom line is this country is our capacity to exercise soft power been so greatly diminished. And that is really scary, because our hard power, we still are quite confident about it. And that's where we'll end up going when we don't get our way.
Yeah, the world respects us the way you respect a 5-year-old who's gotten its hands on a gun, just like a really cool guy that you respect.
Right, exactly, of course. So Nikki Haley leaving. Some people are speculating that perhaps she's anticipating Lindsey Graham going to Attorney General and then getting appointed senator from South Carolina, serving for 6 years perhaps, and then running for president in 2024. Who knows? But I don't think we're going to be so lucky for her to move on to a corporate job. We may not be the lucky boys and girls that she is. And we may see her in the future in our politics. All right. I should tell you this, too. One of the most important things we do for our health every day is brushing our teeth. Yet most of us don't do it properly. Quip is a better electric toothbrush created by dentists and designers. Quip was designed to make brushing your teeth more simple, affordable, and even enjoyable. Look, folks, the key to an electric toothbrush, here's the dirty little secret. The key to an electric toothbrush is to use it every day. That's what I love about Quip. It has sensitive sonic vibrations, gentle on your sensitive gums. It's got the built-in 2-minute timer pulses every 30 seconds to remind you when to switch. Front top, front top, bottom, back bottom. That's the way you go, folks. I mean, you can really do it in any it doesn't matter. But here's the key. It doesn't require a clunky charger. It runs for 3 months on one charge. Comes with a multi-use cover that mounts to your mirror for a less cluttered sink space. So here's the bottom line. It's not sitting in your room charging, and you got to bring it to the bathroom. You can travel with it so you don't get out of the habit of using it. And that's the key. You got to use your electric toothbrush. Quip is one of the first electric toothbrushes accepted by the American Dental Association. When I was in Vegas, what did I have with me? My Quip. Because you can't possibly fit another electric toothbrush in there. And it's stylish. Quip has been backed by over 20,000 dental professionals. It starts at just $25. And if you go to getquip.com/majority right now, you'll get your first refill pack with a free with a Quip electric toothbrush. Every 3 months, they send you a new toothbrush head, which is what you got to do. It's the other thing. You don't want to be using a bunch of mush on the end of your toothbrush. Matt. That's your first refill pack free at GetQuip. That's GetQuip.com/majority. Do it now. All right, I'm going to take a quick break. When we come back, the deputy editor of New York Magazine, David Wallace Wells, on the latest IPCC report. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program the deputy editor of New York Magazine, David Wallace Wells, on the latest IPCC report. But let's just start by with this, David. I mean, I think people, a lot of people, I don't want to say most people, unfortunately, but a lot of people very aware of your piece from last year in July of 2017, The Uninhabitable Earth. I think there's even a Wikipedia page about your piece.
Yeah, so flattering.
And well, I mean, it's important, and I want to talk about some subsequent pieces you've written about sort of the lack of attention it gets, but you basically walked through, I think it was, close to 10, maybe more, sort of elements, 9, I think it was, of what we can anticipate sometime in the future, not that far off. And apparently, as of a couple of days ago, it was reported that it's going to be a lot quicker than we had anticipated. But go through some of these sort of like, just to go over your piece just a little bit. Some of those elements which we can anticipate, that range from doomsday, when you talk about the and then heat death and so on. Like, what are the ones that you think Americans are going to have to deal with the most?
Well, the first thing I should say is that piece was sort of systematically focused on worst-case scenarios, so it's a bit scarier than I think we're likely to see over the next couple of decades, but that's not to say that any of these are not worth worrying about. They're all absolutely terrifying, and in fact, which we can talk about later, I think considerably scarier than even the new IPCC report suggests. But yeah, I mean, I think the public has been generally sort of trained by scientists and science journalists over the last couple of decades to really think about climate change in terms of sea level rise. And the truth is that the impacts are so much bigger than that. There's literally not a person on the earth in 2050 who won't be affected by climate change in one form or another. And we all live in climate, and the fact that it's being deformed will deform all of our lives too. So, there are a lot of elements of that. There's, direct heat effects, which are not going to hit so hard in the U.S., but in other parts of the world, so that by 2050, many of the biggest cities in India will be literally lethally hot in the summer. You won't be able to go outside and walk around without dying. There are huge agricultural impacts. So for every degree of warming, grain yields, grain is the biggest component of human diet, grain yields decline by between 10 and 20%. So if we're talking about a world that's 3 or 4 degrees warmer, we could have, 30 to 80% less grain to feed the world, and the world will have more people to eat that grain by the end of the century. But the things that, to me, sort of sum up the whole problem are ones that we don't really talk about much at all, which are only beginning to be studied by the academics who work on this stuff, and those are the economic impacts and the effects on conflict. So the researchers who are really looking at this closely now think that if we don't do anything about climate change, if we stay on the track that we're on now, the emissions track that we're on now, by the end of the 21st century, global GDP will be more than 30% lower than it would be without climate change. There will be, in terms of conflict, the relationship with war is a little complicated. It has to do with a lot of these other impacts. It has to do with, droughts that produce famines, and has to do with public health issues and all that kind of stuff. But in general, a world that's, say, 3 or 4 degrees warmer will have as much as half again as many wars as we have today. And those are two of the metrics I think people haven't really thought much about, but they also serve to sort of encompass all of the other problems. The costs of extreme weather are reflected in those economic projections, and the costs of wildfires are, encapsulated in those projections. So I think we're starting to wake up to some of the impacts beyond sea level rise, but we haven't really thought about just how dramatic those impacts are going to be.
The irony, of course, in terms of the U.S., to the extent that there's been any agency that has looked at the concept of destabilization around the globe as a function of climate change is the Pentagon, right? I mean, they're the only ones. They, as far as I last remember, I mean, I don't know if they're allowed to even say this anymore, frankly, but that climate change was one of the greatest threats to national security.
Yeah, and that is, that has so many different components to it. I mean, just to start with, literally every Navy base in the world will be underwater in a couple of decades. So that entire branch of the military will at the very least have to completely rebuild its infrastructure from scratch. That's also true of a lot of Air Force bases. But beyond that, the whole map of the world is going to change. The Arctic is opening up. There are already tankers that are now traveling through the Arctic. That territory is going to be disputed. And particularly if we see a kind of revived conflict with Russia, which we seem likely to see over the next decade or two, there is a natural sort of IRL, component to that, and that we're going to be fighting over control of the Arctic. Our conflict with China, which is likely to also get worse over the next couple of decades, is going to play out in part over the South China Sea, where there are a number of islands, some of which the U.S. currently controls or has sort of military relationships with, which are going to sink, and where the Chinese are already building a number of artificial islands, which are designed, among other things, to endure in a world with dramatic sea level rise. On top of all that, it's, I guess, up for debate exactly how much the U.S. will continue to be the world's policeman in 20 or 30 or 50 years. But to the extent that the military is doing the planning for that, they're planning for a world with, as I said, as many as half again as many wars. A lot of people think that the conflicts that we've seen over the last couple of decades in the Middle East have a lot to do with warming. That's the part of the world that's been hit hardest by the warming that's already gone on. And there are some really incredible studies showing, down to like the month that heat waves and droughts and other climate shocks are responsible for a huge portion of the ethnic strife in the Middle East. So we're already starting to see a world that is made more violent and rivalrous by climate change. But as the Pentagon knows, that's going to get worse as the planet gets warmer.
Some have speculated or theorized that in Syria, climate change impacted grain production, and the Assad had sold off a bunch of their stores of grain, and the prices of the grain also implicated, some of the turmoil there. But I mean, putting that aside for a moment, let's turn to the IPCC. This latest update. Give us a sense of what that update was. I mean, it sort of dropped like a bomb. And how much? Well, characterize it for us, and let's talk about sort of what was going on behind that.
Yeah, well, I think the best way to actually understand it is to back up a little bit to the Paris Accords, which were signed in 2016, and which established this target for the world that we should stay below 2 degrees Celsius of warming. So, it may be a little confusing to your listeners. A lot of the American coverage of this deals with temperatures in Fahrenheit, but the rest of the world is always talking about Celsius and then rounder numbers. So it's the numbers that I tend to use. So the Paris Accords established this target of 2 degrees, and that was actually a bit controversial. As recently as a decade or so before, the scientific community had understood 2 degrees to be basically the threshold of catastrophe. It's about where most scientists understand the tipping point for Arctic melt to be, so that they think that if we get past 2 degrees, that all of the ice in the Arctic will eventually melt, and there's no way that we'll be able to get it back. That'll take a really, really long time, probably over centuries, but if we don't want seas that are 200 feet higher, we'll need to pull up short of 2 degrees. Now, right after the Paris Accords were signed, a number of representatives from much smaller nations came out and said, these impacts are going to be hitting us much, much sooner than 2 degrees, and we really need to think about ways of halting warming before that. The president of the Marshall Islands called 2 degrees of warming genocide. And that started a conversation both among the scientists who are working on this report and generally in the scientific community. There's been a lot more research just over the last couple of years about this particular question, like what would the world look like at 1.5 degrees? What would the world look like at 2 degrees? And this report is basically the IPCC's version of that. So they are saying that, first of all, 1.5 degrees, which they say we're going to get to by about 2040, is considerably worse than the same body had said it was before, that the impacts on food production and food stability and security is going to be much worse. Sea level is going to be worse. The effect on climate refugees is going to be much higher. But also that as the presidents of the Marshall Islands sort of predicted, and the people like him predicted in 2016, that the climate impacts of a 2 degree warmer world are so much higher that really we absolutely need to halt warming well before 2 degrees if we want to avoid a truly catastrophic climate scenario. Now
I should just say, just so that people can picture this, 2 degrees of Celsius, if I'm not mistaken, is about 3.5, maybe 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so just so the people get a sense of like what we're talking about, like, you know, none of us can feel that, right? We're just talking about the implications of it around the world. As an average, we will feel it on a daily basis.
Well, and it's the main impacts are not on the average day. It's that they dramatically expand the possibility for extreme events. So this past summer, we had this basically unprecedented global heat wave, hundreds of people dying all across the world in a heat wave that lasted a few weeks, as in the Middle East, in northern Russia, in Canada, in the U.S., in Japan, and literally that had never happened before in human history. And quite soon, that kind of summer will be a completely normal average summer, probably within a couple of decades. But to get back to the IPCC report for a second, so yeah, they're basically saying 2 degrees is going to be a climate catastrophe. They say that it will endanger the lives of hundreds of millions of people through a variety of these impacts, and we absolutely have to, do everything we can, mobilize at the scale that we mobilized before World War II, globally, to make sure that we get somewhere close to 1.5 degrees of warming. Now, the crazy thing about this, I mean, this report has been received with incredible alarm. The world is really freaking out about it. The crazy thing is that, basically, they admit that 1.5 degrees of warming is an impossible goal. The truth is that 2 degrees of warming, which is what they're saying is the absolute catastrophe that we must avoid, is more or less also an impossible goal. So I mentioned earlier the Paris Accords, they established this target of 2 degrees, but the actual pledges in that agreement, each country made a pledge, we're going to cut our emissions by this amount. All of those pledges add up to a world that by 2100 is about 3.4 degrees warmer. So we haven't even made the commitments equivalent to get us below 3 degrees, let alone 2 degrees. And on top of that, no major industrialized country in the world is on track to meet those commitments. So at the moment, we're blithely going forward on a track that is going to take us north of 4 degrees by 2100, which is literally twice as bad as the scenario that the IPCC is now calling so catastrophic that we must do absolutely everything in our power to avoid it. So while this report is in its way incredibly alarming and is very sort of conscientiously raising the alarm with the public, the truth is that the bigger picture is much scarier than even this report suggests.
Insofar as we don't even have the imagination, never mind the ability to execute. We haven't even imagined the plan yet to execute, never mind executing the plan that we already have.
Yeah, I mean, it's a kind of an interesting little case study in what motivates human action. We have most of the technology that we need to completely green the economy if we wanted to. For the first time ever in most of the world or much of the world, green energy sources are cheaper than dirty energy sources. We know about a lot of agricultural solutions that could make our agriculture much more efficient. Agriculture is a really underappreciated contributor to climate change. It's about 35 or 40% of the global emissions. We're just not doing any of that. And if you think that, as most scientists will tell you, we need to completely green out our energy infrastructure and make our global agricultural carbon neutral by, even the conservative scientists would say 2050. Many others who I trust a bit more would say by 2040, in order to avoid 3 degrees or higher of warming. That's a really big problem. In New York, we just finished a minor extension of a single subway line that, depending on how you count, took 50 years to build. And we're talking about rebuilding the entire energy infrastructure of the planet in about 30 years. Like I said, we have those tools. It's not like solar is a fantasy technology, but we actually need to put it into practice. And that's what a lot of these activists mean when they say what we need is a mobilization on the scale of World War II. It needs to be the absolute number one priority for all governments of the world and much of the industry of the world. And at the moment, while there are more and more people worrying about climate change, we're very far from it being anybody's top priority.
And when we talk about that in terms of World War II, I mean, there was more or less, if not explicit, like an implicit nationalization of a lot of the manufacturing capacity of, the world's, by the world's
industry.
Governments. Industry by the world's governments, where it's basically like, no, you want to make cars, but guess what? You're making tanks. And that's sort of what we're talking about, right? I mean, like, basically, we need our government in the context of the United States to nationalize our energy production and infrastructure.
Well, that's one of the reasons that green energy has gotten so much cheaper is that there was in the Obama years a lot of tax subsidy and other kind of VC investment that the government made into the development of green energy, which, as a result, proceeded much more quickly than even its biggest boosters would have predicted. I mean, we're much farther along on that curve than people thought we'd be a decade ago, and that's really great news. But actually, the way I look at it, the U.S. is important. I mean, at the moment, it's the world's second biggest emitter, but it's also the only country in the world, the only big country in the world that's whose emissions are going down already. And the major driver of future climate change is going to be China, India, and to a lesser extent, sub-Saharan Africa, where there's sort of scheduled to be a massive population boom over the next century. And China, it's interesting. Since Trump pulled out of the Paris Accords, China has sort of seized the mantle of rhetorical leadership on climate in the world. I think they see a kind of geopolitical opportunity there, and they've also done a lot of really great stuff on climate. They've been especially focused on cleaning up their air pollution, because that also poses a huge public health issue for them. But when we talk about climate change generally, I think that a lot of Americans, even a lot of sort of Western Europeans, have a mistaken idea that what we're dealing with is the legacy of several centuries of industrial activity, so tracing it back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. In fact, more than half of the carbon that humanity has emitted in the entire history of the planet has been emitted since Al Gore published his first book on climate, like 25 years ago. And almost all of that activity has to do with the industrialization of the developing world, China most especially. So when you hear from people like Steven Pinker and there are a lot of kind of optimists out there who say, like, the last 25 years, the era of globalization, it's pulled so many people out of poverty, it's almost eliminated infant mortality, and that's totally true. I mean, you look at these graphs, and the world is much better than most of us in the West really appreciate, because the standard of living in the developing world has climbed so rapidly. But almost all of those gains were bought by this process of industrialization that has also brought us to the kind of brink of planetary catastrophe. So going forward, a huge amount depends on those countries. I mean, China especially, India secondly, and then the countries of sub-Saharan Africa as a sort of third order interest. And the U.S. is important in the way that the U.S. is, still global economic leader, global geopolitical leader, and can really set agenda and bully people into signing up to commitments they might not otherwise want to make. But in terms of what we're doing within our borders, the truth is we're much less consequential in terms of what's going to happen than some of these other countries, which I think is a little bit actually of an uncomfortable feeling for a lot of Americans who both want to feel like, their story is the global story, but also want to be able to villainize the American right and the fossil fuel companies, who are, to be totally clear, like obvious villains in this story. They've done, climate denial has been absolutely horrible, but it really is only a very partial explanation for where we are, and it has almost nothing to do with like how scary things are going to get.
All right. Well, that is both scary and then sort of with an added layer of terrifying, because to the extent that, because I want to talk, you wrote a piece, I guess it was, I can't remember, maybe at the beginning of the year, about, how did the end of the world become old news? I guess that was over the summer, and maybe just a couple months ago. And the idea that, I mean, it's certainly, I know on this program we talk about climate change far less since November 8th of 2016 than we did prior to that, because there's a real sense of like, doesn't matter. Not that climate change doesn't matter, but no matter how much we talk about it, there is nothing we're going to do to move a Republican-controlled Congress and a Republican president. And now, and we should maybe touch on this briefly too, a Republican or right-wing controlled Supreme Court with Brett Kavanaugh coming on, who is, to the extent that one could put up roadblocks to anything positive happening, that, in terms of the apparatus that already exists, he is, sort of the poster child for that. But if
I think it's just, sorry to cut you off, but it's his positions on Roe have been talked about a lot, but actually he's considerably more conservative on the question of federal regulation than he is on the question of on the question of choice.
Indeed.
So
I think this is why, frankly, the right was so jazzed to have him. Roe is, sort of the shiny object there for them. But I think from a business and the corporate perspective, his philosophy that government regulation is almost in and of itself illegitimate is, I think, very attractive to these corporations. But so we're twice removed here, right? Like, it doesn't matter. We could put 5 million people on the streets tomorrow in New York, and the Republican president, the Republican Congress would just be like, yeah, whatever, enjoy your blue state. But on top of that, even if we were to move forward, we would be, we would still be, hoping that our soft power could sort of somehow influence these other countries. I mean, what do we do about that? I mean, I was rereading your piece on these disasters and looking at, like, I think it was New Delhi that you said would be inhabitable within, several decades because of the heat. And I'm thinking to myself, well, we made Iraq. I mean, like, we made Iraq inhabitable for at least several 100,000 people that we killed. And we created 4 million refugees for over the course of, 5 or 6 years. No one, it wasn't, people cared, but not that many. Like, not enough to really fundamentally change our government. We were directly responsible for that. Never mind, we're just, in the bleachers watching it, as New Delhi becomes inhabitable. How do we? What's the psychology behind this? I mean, what do we do?
It's a really complicated question to answer. I think, personally, I return always to politics. I think that, we have what I think of as a kind of a delusion in the well-off liberal West that we can make a difference with our consumption choices, that if we drive electric cars and if we fly less and if we, eat less red meat, that, on some level we can address the problem that way. In my mind, like, politics is such a moral multiplier here that's like the only way that we're going to get to the kind of, where we're talking about the World War II analogy, the only way we're going to get to that level of transformation is by applying political pressure to our governments and around the world. And, I think that's, one reason the midterms are so important. It's another reason that, 2020 is going to be so important. But looking at the bigger global picture is even scarier. I mean, the obstacles to change on this front in the U.S. are real, but globally what we're seeing over the last decade is a retreat from the very kinds of institutions and sort of networks of cooperation that would be our only hope for true global action. So you have all across the world, nativist movements, nationalistic movements, right-wing leaders who are really, really focused on securing the well-being of their own country, not thinking about the globe as one community that needs to deal with this genuinely existential threat. And that's really, really alarming. It's only continuing further. I mean, the election results in Brazil earlier this week or over the weekend were, they got one more round to go, but it seems quite clear that Bolsonaro is going to win, and that's just another step forward in this. We built right after World War II, after many, many millennia of human conflict, we built a kind of a network of cooperation. The UN is a big part of that, but the EU is another feature of it. We had globalization itself, which is, obviously a kind of complicated economic system that has produced many losers, but even so was really an effort for the world to be working together and moving towards shared interests. And over the last decade, that's really changed. It's interesting. You said, we talk a lot less about climate change since November 2016. If you look at the public opinion polls, actually the peak of awareness and anxiety about climate change was in 2007 in the U.S., and that was in part, I think, because of Katrina, and in part because of the Al Gore movie, An Inconvenient Truth. But that interest was leveled off completely. I mean, it was cut down by the financial crisis. People started worrying much more about the state of the world when they worried about the state of the world in those terms, in financial terms. And there's a kind of a bait and switch there too, because, we've sort of understood for about a generation or so. I've understood. I'm, essentially a neoliberal technocratic kind of person. And I had the idea that the public would only accept action on climate change if it came for free or if it was going to offer economic opportunity. And a lot of the messaging around climate adaptation is sort of focused on those notes saying oh, look at all the green jobs we're creating. We're now at a place where we see that the economic costs for not acting are going to be so much bigger than the economic costs of acting. It's almost like you don't think of making an investment in the stock market as a cost because you expect that over time that you'll be drawing money out of that investment. And it's getting to the point where it seems almost as clear about climate. There was a report a few months ago that said that if we were to successfully, aggressively act on climate, the world would save $26 trillion by just 2030. I think the number in the IPCC report is $50 trillion by that same year. And that's just 2 decades away. So,
but isn't the problem with that calculus that that's not how the world works? I mean, I'm not even talking about human psychology in that, if I spend a couple of bucks on my car now and change the oil, I won't have to deal with the engine seizing up, down the road. I'm talking about we don't, in the same way that we perceive our economy as doing well, if the GDP is hitting a certain number and the stock market is doing a certain, that's indicative of some people doing well, right? Isn't the problem we have when I talk about nationalizing, it's not because we need to marshal these forces. It's because we need to constrain the forces that are preventing us from acting, right? Because the problem is not that it's going to cost all of us too much money relative to what we would save if we do that. It's that it's going to cost some people who have
powerful people.
Yes, outsized power in our politics. It's going to cost them more.
Yeah, I mean, namely, I guess, the fossil fuel businesses, but
of
in
course.
general, anybody who has sort of entrenched economic power. It's I think the sort of transformation, the revolution that the economic revolution that's really necessary is bound to upend many of those sort of power hierarchies, and the people at the top of them don't want that to happen.
Does that implicate? I mean, you self-identify as a neoliberal insofar as that you're hoping that the market is going to solve this and that the sort of market calculations. But when you see for someone like yourself who is so acutely aware of the sort of train that's barreling towards us as we're sitting on the tracks, does that implicate your perspective on sort of that broader question? Because it seems to me that Brett Kavanaugh, just as an example, Brett Kavanaugh is on the Supreme Court because there's a lot of people out there are hoping he's going to overturn Roe v. Wade. He may or may not. They may do other things that will inhibit a woman's right to choose. But at the end of the day, the reason why the real push behind him, the power behind him was his perspective on limiting government's ability to regulate corporations. Like, do we, if that is the successful recipe to address, what an agenda, do we need something like that on the nominal center left? In other words, like, do we do this as a bank shot? Because obviously climate change is not motivating people enough. Do we make it about something else so that we get a regime in there that will address climate change, right? Because if the problem is entrenched power of moneyed interests, do we go for, let's just say John Doe, who is going to get rid of student debt, let's say, because ideologically that person's also going to maybe nationalize our power structure?
Well, I think that there are a lot of different paths forward, and my own perspective is that, like, we don't just need to focus on one at the expense of others. But I completely agree with you that the problem is beyond, at the moment at least, beyond the market's power to solve, and that combined with 2008, we're already seeing climate change and the financial crisis both have generated a huge amount of skepticism towards unregulated market power. I think that's very valuable on its own, but I also think it's especially useful in thinking about how we might mobilize action on climate. The question you raised about the rhetorical play to be made here. I mean, I think it's for me, it's less about finding someone who is running on student debt relief, and more about what things about climate change can we imagine and put into play that have much more emotional salience for voters than, say, sea level rise. And I actually think that there are a number of really important ones that have basically not been played by climate activists to this point. The first one is the one I mentioned earlier, which is about the economic impact. I mean, if we're really looking at a world that is 30% less rich, because has 30% less growth over the rest of the century because of climate change, that's twice as big an impact as the Great Depression, and it's permanent. That's huge. Like, that is, economic suffering beyond the scale that any of us can imagine. It's 8 times as bad as the Great Recession was, and we see how much that scrambled American politics, geopolitics. So I think that, like, putting the economic numbers in front of people much more aggressively, I think is really important, because it'll hit them in their own, they can see it hitting them in their own wallets and in the society as a whole. I mean,
but can you though? I mean, I don't mean to that to me seems so abstract. Like the idea that down the road we're going to lose $1 trillion or $1 billion, doesn't even matter. A gazillion in economic activity. Like, is there really a way for the average American to sort of put that in their wallet, like as opposed to something that is like literally affects their wallet?
It's interesting. I mean, personally, I think yes, and it connects to something we were talking about before, which is that, when I said that I'm sort of temperamentally a neoliberal, what I really meant is, like, I came of age in the 90s. I feel like in so many different ways I believe I believe in my core in ways that my brain maybe now doubts, that, like, the world is going to get better, that economic growth produces well-being and happiness, and that, like, history is moving in one direction towards more prosperity and health for all. And I think that basic intuition about the world is dramatically threatened by climate change. Right. And whether or not the average American can say, well, if this happens and this happens, my bank account will be this much smaller. If you imagine a permanent Great Recession, I think that just about everybody can really understand it's not just exactly how they and their family may bet, but the entire outlook of the country and indeed the planet will have changed away from the idea that your children will be better off than you are and will be living more abundant, prosperous lives than you did, to one in which the past actually looks sunnier than the future. And that is so dramatic a transformation of perspective. I don't think we've really started to process it, but that is the bargain that's being offered by climate change. I would say one other thing, totally separate from the economic case, is public health. There is an enormous public health interest in stopping climate change. So at the moment, 9 million people are killed every year just from the pollution that comes out of burning fossil fuels. It's called small particulate pollution. 9 million people. And some scientists recently did a study where they, in exactly the benchmarks being used by this IPCC report, looked at the difference between the world's public health at 1.5 degrees and the world's public health at 2 degrees. And they found that just based on this one public health issue, just based on the small particulate pollution that comes out of fossil fuel burning, a world that is 2 degrees warmer would have 150 million more deaths than a world that is 1.5 degrees warmer. So that's 25 holocausts. To go back to what I was saying earlier, like, we have no chance of getting to 2 degrees, so it's going to be considerably worse than that. But the public health imperative, I think, is actually quite strong. That's the reason that China actually has moved so aggressively on climate change over the last few years, is that they were dealing with a lot of these public health impacts quite directly.
Right, because their government's going to have to pay for it. I mean, they understand the implications of it on their government. Go ahead.
And the public, it's not just deaths. I mean, there are huge impacts just on the amount of carbon in the atmosphere on cognitive functioning. So, in cities with a lot of carbon pollution, test score results fall by 10 or 15%, which is really dramatic. I saw a study recently that the effect from car exhaust on premature birth and low birth weight in babies is so strong that in areas where they just introduced Easy Pass and therefore the cars moved more quickly through the toll and distributed less exhaust in the community, that low birth rate and premature birth fell by double digits in those neighborhoods. So there are all of these sort of public health correlates that I think people would at least be open to getting agitated about, getting activated by, in a way that they find the prospect of, say, sea level or distant cost to agricultural yields quite hard to wrap their minds around. If they know that, the average lifespan of their children is going to be cut by several years because of the amount of pollution in the atmosphere, I actually do think that is a quite strong case for cutting that pollution. And if we cut all that pollution, we will in so doing, solve climate change. Now, the problem with that is that at the moment, all of the pollution that's in the atmosphere is suppressing global temperatures by about 1 degree. It's called aerosol pollution. All of the shit that we've put into the atmosphere over the last 150 years, it's floating up there and it's reflecting sunlight back towards the sun, which means that the planet is not as warm as it really should be if it was unpolluted. So if we solve the public health problem, if we eliminated all of the pollution in the atmosphere, we would be saving these 9 million lives every year and having all of these other beneficial impacts on public health. But the planet would immediately get 1 degree warmer, which means that we'd already be more than 2 degrees warmer than the pre-industrial average. We'd be already past, again, this threshold that the IPCC was just saying this week is absolutely unacceptable. In some true sense, like with a true state of global warming on the planet, we're actually already north of 2 degrees. It's just that we have this weird backhanded, pollution thing that is happening to suppress global temperature so that we think we're only at 1.1 degrees. We're living as though we're only at 1.1 degrees, but the sort of true global warming impact is north of 2 degrees already.
Wow, that's encouraging. So if we're successful in saving lives, we're going to end up costing lives on some level.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I got to say, like, I'm a 1,000 flowers bloom type of guy in terms of ideas. I'm starting to think though that it's the implications of global warming just are too abstract for people as a political motivator. It feels like to me, but we'll see. I should have given folks like a little bit of a warning before we did this.
Well, I would just say about that. I mean, I think that the world is starting to wake up to the issue. I think that with all of the extreme weather we've seen, with the wildfires, with the heat waves, with all the hurricanes, we have another hurricane bearing down on Florida just this week, which is crazy. It could be possibly a Category 4, Category 5 storm. We haven't even really heard about it. That the world is waking up to the effects of warming and starting to see that it is something other than just sea level rise. But the problem is that we don't have that much time.
Let me ask you
as
this
I said earlier,
as a last question. To what extent, I mean, because the Republican Party, as far as I know, is the only major political party in the world that believes that global climate change is not real. I mean, as a tenet of their party. To what extent, if the Republican Party, and obviously I'm asking you to speculate wildly here, but if the United States was not inhibited from being a leader in this, Obama goes out and signs the Paris Accords, obviously completely insufficient. But if there was no political cost whatsoever to this, if the entire country was on board in the same way that maybe a small, Indonesian island was, I mean, what do you think the difference would be in the world?
I don't think it would be much. I mean, as I said before, I think the main drivers of this are, just to take China as an example. China is an authoritarian regime. They do not have any of these political considerations. And while they're moving much faster than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago in climate, they're still moving way too slow. That is because the main...
Do you think an unencumbered United States would have been able to make it move quicker?
I think to some degree, but I think that the economic trade-offs are really the thing that is that have slowed action on this. Right. And there was a really interesting study that came out a couple weeks ago that compared the amount that climate change would cost particular countries over the coming decades with how much each of those countries was responsible for warming. And the U.S. actually came surprisingly high on the list of countries that were going to be affected economically. They had the second highest economic cost of climate change. And we are in this weird kind of karmic balance where actually just as our share of of responsibility is exactly the same as our share of the climate burden that we'll be bearing. India is by far the worst on this metric. They have their share of climate suffering is 4 times higher than their share of climate responsibility, and they're the country in the world that's going to be hit hardest by climate change. And China is in the reverse situation. China is at the moment they are 4 times more responsible for climate change than they are, going to be seeing impacts themselves. Right. So the economic incentives in China are actually running in the opposite direction that we'd want them to run. They can theoretically pollute more, and those costs will be felt
by other
mostly
people.
by other. Yeah, and that's the real problem, is that generally we haven't developed a system where we're all in this together, and so particular countries have an incentive to slow walk their own commitments, do less than they need to, because fossil fuel is cheap growth. But if we all do that, we're really fucked. I mean, and there needs to be, one body, one coalition that addresses this totally head on. I think that's really the lost opportunity from American leadership. But I don't think that we'd be much farther along right now, and I don't think that we'd be facing a different set of dilemmas than we do now. It's really, what are the Chinese going to do? What are the Indians going to do? And what are countries like Nigeria and Kenya going to do as their populations double and triple over the next couple decades?
David Wallace Wells, thank you so much. Really appreciate talking to you on it. It's fascinating, but also wildly depressing. But thank you. I appreciate the time today.
Anytime. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Yeah. Boo-doop. Say that again.
The world will end not with a bang, but a badoop.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean,
just kidding. No, it won't.
I am less hopeful that talking about the implications of climate change are going to bring about any major political change in this country, and more encouraged that maybe a United States that is more aggressive couldn't convince or provide some incentives for other countries. But I'm increasingly, starting to believe that, the best way to solve climate change is to look for an issue set that, somebody who has a platform of dealing with climate change shares. In other words, backdoor, because it's just, you can tell me on one hand that 30, 40 years from now, everybody's going to have less money in their pocket. Or you could tell me, hey, I'm going to put more money in your pocket. I'm going to vote for the person who's going to put more money in my pocket. And if they end up dealing with climate change, great. But I want somebody who's going to put more money in my pocket right now. Well, I'm being a little bit overbroad, but I'm saying I want direct benefit now. Not, it's too abstract for you to say you've got to avoid, some type of disadvantage 20 years down the road, 30 years down the road.
Well, there's always been a sector of capital that's very short-sighted, right? They care more about whatever benefit the market gets in the short term, which is one more reason the Democrats are actually the ones saving capitalism, right? Because you can't have capitalism if we're all dead.
I guess that's true. I mean, I guess China is also. I don't know. I'm
there's
not sure.
Nothing like. Under what political formation could we persuade the whole world to adopt the strict climate standards that we've adopted in a magical land where Bernie Sanders is president and still have capitalist growth?
But that, I don't think there is one, but you could call, I don't know. I guess if you want to call, China as, operating under a capitalist system, I think perhaps
it's
on some
state
level.
Capitalism.
Yeah. But I just don't know that the answer, at least in the context of, is, I don't know that talking about it in those terms is any more effective than talking about it in the terms that I think growth is going to be less or it's going to cost us more. From a capitalist perspective, here is a guy who has a capitalist perspective on that, saying that it makes total sense to avoid climate change, and that's still not compelling, even within the context of a capitalist system. Because the problem is not that according to his calculations, is not that it's capitalism per se, because from a capitalist perspective, it's going to cost more to not address climate change than to address it.
Well,
I think the problem is that we have a disequilibrium of power in two different ways. One, at least in the context of this country, that there are people who have political power that is outsized and are preventing it. But also, the bottom line is that China is going to externalize its costs.
Well, I think you've hit on one of the very important contradictions that exist within capitalism, which is that if you believe in Marx's theory of how value is created, it only comes from human labor and resource extraction. And capitalism has to have infinite growth in order to function, and you cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. And it's almost feels a little bit mean for the industrialized countries of the West who had their industrial age based on the environment as an infinite free gift, to then turn around and tell developing countries of the world that they can't do that same thing.
Well, that may be the case, but that doesn't seem to be really the biggest problem. India is going to pay a lot more than they're going to get out of this system. China is going to get a lot more than they're going to pay out of the system. I mean, that seems to be sort of what is problematic. At least the U.S. is aligned. It's going to pay for what it for what it, you know, for all the. There's going to be no free dance cards essentially for the states, anyways.
Yeah.
But all right, well, that's why we have a fun half, folks.
God.
So that little palate cleanser. Just a reminder: this show relies on your support. Oh, God. Ugh. What a horrible week. It's only Tuesday. This show relies on your support for us to do this every day. You can become a member by going to jointhemajorityreport.com. Jointhemajorityreport.com. And as our way of saying thank you, we give you extra content every day so that if you want to avoid something that is super bleak, you can just skip right through to the fun half where we just, you know, make fun of people and loosen up. So jointhemajorityreport.com. Also, don't forget justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code MAJORITY, get 10% off. We're sitting here right now. I'm staring right at our 5-pound bag of Majority Report blend that we keep in the office. You can do the same in your office or your home. 5-pound bag. You don't have to get a 5-pound bag. You get a 1-pound bag. You can get a bunch of different other flavors if you want. Tonight is the Michael Brooks Show. Michael is sick, but it'll be interesting to see if he shows up for his own program tonight. My guess is probably, because hangovers don't necessarily last that long. Who's the guest? Do you know who's the guest is tonight?
I have not looked at the sheet yet.
All right, there you go.
Alex Perrine, I think, is in.
Alex Perrine? Okay. So it's Alex Perrine. So check out the Michael Brooks Show this evening. You can listen to it after the fact on iTunes, but you can watch it on YouTube at our YouTube channel. And the Antifada.
Yeah, so we did something a little bit different this week on the Antifada. Our friend Jacob Blumenfeld was in town defending his dissertation. He is now a PhD. So we had him on.
Wow.
And he happens to be an expert on the German egoist communist philosopher Max Stirner. He has a book coming out with 0 books about him. We'd also been wanting to get Dr. Bones on the show from the Guillotine podcast, and he's also really into Stirner. So we sort of hosted a Socratic dialogue between Drs. Bones and Blumenfeld about Max Stirner and anarchism and radical egoism and all that good stuff.
There you go.
I did not know anything about it beforehand, so if you don't know anything about it, that's fine. And now I do know something about it, so check it out if you want to learn about
folks.
that very crazy thing.
And Matt, literary hangover?
Yeah, we did Cory Robbins' The Reactionary Mind.
Ooh, I can't wait to
Conservatism. Yeah, we actually take a clip from this show, from the zero-sum debate.
Did you check on the licensing for that? I mean, what the...
Well, you can talk to my First Amendment lawyers.
Who are your First Amendment lawyers?
Well, that's... You'll have to talk to my lawyers about that.
Wow.
And
I got to talk to your lawyers to find out who your lawyers are?
Exactly.
All right, very. That's well done. You stay very insulated. You don't have to deal with any of that.
Yeah,
stuff.
I don't even know who they are.
So, okay. So, you review the Reactionary Mind. It's not really a review, but
no, we just discuss it. Play a few clips from it. Play a few clips from Cory Robin discussing it at Harvard. And yeah, it's good. It's sort of, if you want to know why everything seems so hopeless right now, it's because conservatives have won everything. And Cory Robin explains that's why conservatism is sort of incoherent and cruel.
There you go. All right, folks, quick break. Head into the fun half. 646-257-3920 is the number. 646-257-3920 is the number. We will be right back with the fun half. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
You know, I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous, you're a little bit upset, you're riled up.
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.
Rand Paul.
I had my first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agree.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook. Throw our hands up. Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me...
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
We are back. It is the fun half of the program. We sure could use that, ladies and gentlemen, today.
I don't even know if I feel like it.
Forget it. Let's just wrap this shit up. No fun. No fun today. Let's go to, I'll tell you what, let's go to the phones. Calling from an 865 area code. Who's this? Please be fun.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Terry from Tennessee.
Terry from Tennessee. What's on your mind, Terry?
Sorry, I'm a little nervous, and I'm actually a little bit embarrassed. I used to be a Jordan Peterson fan.
Ooh, all right. Well, this could be fun. Why?
Well, I'll get to that later, but I just want to thank you for everything that you do, because actually discovered you by watching some of your videos because they were in the recommended video section. And I actually, after watching some of your videos, I had an epiphany after I looked at it in a can of Pringles that I just finished. And I realized that it's not the individual that suffers, but the group. I'm sorry, I'm just a little verklempt because that's just some cheesy shit about capitalism. Anyway, so, full disclosure, I've actually had sex before, so obviously I'm not a Jordan Peterson fan.
All right. Well,
but
you got us.
So I wanted to call in first, obviously, thanks for what you do and all you guys. But also, since Michael Brooks isn't there, I just wanted to, I'll be nice. he is going to be writing a book about the intellectual dark web, and I wanted to inform him about Joe Rogan. Just if I could, have, or just, he has a forum that explains a lot of why he has such a large alt-right following. And so if you could just look into that. Also remind people that back in 2012, he had a scientist who claimed that HIV does not cause AIDS.
Oh, Joe Rogan
So,
did.
Yeah, back in 2012. I think it's...
It's the way you build an
episode
audience, buddy.
282.
It's the way you build an audience. Not with people calling in and pretending to be Jordan Peterson fans. I can tell you that. Thank you so much, Terry. I appreciate it. Let's go to calling from a 214 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Scott from Dallas.
Hello, Scott from Dallas. What's on your mind?
Okay, so bleak subject today, but just kind of, I think part of the issue with today's topic was that places like the New York Times and CNN can't do math. So they talk about degree change from Fahrenheit to Celsius, and they say 1.5 Celsius equals 2.7 Fahrenheit.
Okay.
Well, 1
That's not
Celsius is... Yeah, it's not true. Yeah, exactly. It's 33.8 Fahrenheit.
Right.
And yeah. And so that kind of thing is just everywhere. So I think if Americans knew, hey, it's going to get 30 to 60 degrees hotter, that would make a difference.
Wait, it's going to get 30 to 60 degrees hotter?
That's if the IPCC report is right in saying that it's going to increase 1 to 2 degrees Celsius, and that math is right of 1 degree Celsius equals 33 Fahrenheit, that's what that means.
No. Your math is wrong. 1 degree Celsius as a measure equals approximately 33 degrees Fahrenheit. But 1 unit of Celsius degrees equals 1.8 units of Fahrenheit.
Okay, I'm the dummy then.
All right. Well, I appreciate the call, Scott. That was...
Damn, it would be really hot if we were going to...
That would be, yes.
60 degrees.
Yes. If it's 60 degrees that it's going to go in 20 years, believe me.
I'm digging a hole right now.
Right.
It could always be worse, people.
That's right.
Well, that's what's so galling about the Brett Stevens type of climate change lukewarmism, where if you remember his first column on climate change for the New York Times was saying, well, they might be wrong. It might be like in this,
right.
The unpredictability and the probabilities go either way.
Well, I mean, because it's like this, right? It's like if there was if you smoke cigarettes, there's a 95. I mean, it's not the case, right? I mean, the chances of you getting cancer increase if you smoke cigarettes, but there's not like a 95% chance that you're gonna get cancer. But even in that instance, I'm starting to think it's just all too abstract, and that really, if you're looking in terms of politics, you have to elect politicians who are committed to dealing with climate change. But I'm not convinced you can run on that. I just don't think that is like. I think I think in the same way that you were not going to get the Republicans to all vote for Brett Kavanaugh because he will undo the Chevron doctrine. No, you get tantalizing out there with abortion rights. You need to find some other issue set, I think, to get people to vote for someone who is thoroughly committed to dealing with climate change, instead of actually trying to jazz people up about that. I'm increasingly convinced of that, but who knows? Fortunately, I'm not in charge of the vast majority of all of that. So, all right, let's take one more quick phone call. We'll go to some sound. Call from what is it? 847?
Hello?
Is this Josh in Chicago?
Sam, you're very smart.
Oh, well, thank you, Josh. I do know a little bit about Celsius and Fahrenheit. Just about everything I've said is about the extent in which I know. And then I also know there's a formula which is like times 2 minus 32 degrees, somewhere, something like that. I can't remember what it is, but you could look that up. But go ahead.
You're about right. It's about right. Living in England, I know the Celsius thing.
And then there's like a fraction. You got to multiply it by a fraction or something like that. 9/5, I think it is. But go ahead.
So I wanted to call in, and first of all, Sam, I wish you good luck tonight in your baseball game. But also,
thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good luck. I wanted to call in, and I think earlier this year I called in and talked about how disturbing the sort of rehabilitation of George W. Bush was.
Yes.
Especially among the liberals.
Yes.
And I think this Brett Kavanaugh appointment shows just how horrible, A, how horrible George W. Bush is, but also B, I do feel like this is also part of the fact that Obama left, if, and I read this article in The Intercept, had Obama not let George W. Bush off the hook, and actually, for example, I don't know, punish the people who deserve to be punished for the war crimes they committed, we might not have a Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court today.
I think there would be a whole, it would be a radically different, we would be in a radically different place if Obama, at the very least, look, I don't know what his ability would have been to hold them to account in real terms, right? Like, I don't know if the DOJ would have gone after these people or would have been able to be effective, or they wouldn't have defenses, but I think just even taking the position of reminding people, of just referring to George W. Bush as, even don't say he's a war criminal. It's like say he needs to be held to account to the way that this country was led into that war. To have done anything other than let's just turn the page and forget about it, which is what he did. Which is almost verbatim. Anything else, I think, would have, in many respects, kept us out of the situation we're in now.
Not to mention the financial sector, right? If Obama had not let the financial sector off the hook, I don't think Trump would be president right now.
I think that's probably true as well. And not even off. In addition to having the AG prosecute bankers, but also to have taken a different position. There's a whole host of things. But in terms of just sheer accountability, yes, we have a problem in this country that we do not hold certain sectors of society accountable for anything.
Mm-hmm.
But good point, Josh. Appreciate it.
Yeah. And it's Bush Bush was the person who persuaded Collins.
I think you're right. I think, look, there were other factors, but to have Bush call her four times or whatever it was reportedly certainly did not help. Appreciate the call, Josh. Mm-hmm. Yes, I hope we can stop pretending that George Bush in any way was better than Donald Trump. Stylistically, I don't know. But in terms of substance, George Bush was, I think Donald Trump may be more corrupt in the context of his business dealings than George Bush was, but George Bush didn't have to be.
And Bush seems more potent.
Yes. Well, he had the ability to kill more people, but there's still time for Donald Trump to catch up.
I think the scales are starting to fall from a lot of liberals' eyes about these things. Maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, but I really do.
I hope so.
The Kavanaugh thing was interesting because all the Never Trumpers went to Trump.
Except for a couple.
Yeah, and Bush was back, whipping votes for Kavanaugh, so any liberal that was maybe on he shared a Werther's train is got to be off that.
Right.
Now.
It also took out people like Benjamin Wittes. A lot of those people were sort of revealed as what the problem is. And I don't think enough during this process attention was paid to the fact that this is the Republican Party, folks. Donald Trump was a complete bystander in this process. Complete bystander. I don't think he really cared one way or another. I think he wanted to win. I think he resented the fact that a sexual assault could have derailed Kavanaugh. But beyond that, I don't think he cared. I don't think he cared. Here is, and this, this speaks to, it's just a coincidence that I mentioned during this interview with David Wallace Wells, that maybe we need someone who is talking about relieving student debt and then also happens to have a strong climate change perspective to win into office and actually do something about climate change, at least to the extent that the United States can influence it. It was a coincidence, but there was a report that was just recently put out. I mean, I think like literally within the past couple of days. Maybe it wasn't in the past couple of days, but I've been seeing it more for some reason. That the economic case for canceling all student debt. And there is a report out, maybe it's a very recent actually, that suggests that canceling student debt, $1.4 trillion of student debt, would end up bringing far more in economic activity because, of course, student debt holds you back. You don't buy a house. You don't have kids. You stay stuck in one job, and you maybe there's a couple of entrepreneurs out there that we'll never know about because they have to continue their crappy job at a podcast, say, because and they can't go out on their own because they've got to pay their student debt. Here's Jacob Sobroff. He's in UC Irvine. This is in Orange County. This is California's like sort of, I don't want to say ground zero, but one of the hearts of republicanism in California. He went out there to see what motivates students to vote. Interesting.
Bus stop at UC Irvine. There are, I think, 26,000 kids that go to school here. And if the Democrats can get all of them to vote for them, then maybe Republicans will be in trouble in this district. But I don't know. Sorry, not to be annoying, but we're with NBC News, and I'm just trying to figure out, is anybody here going to vote in the election on November 6th? Anybody? Anybody? Nobody's going to vote? Is anybody going to vote in the congressional election in November? You are. Thank you, sir. Yeah. What do you care about?
What do I care about?
Yeah.
School.
What about you? I'll walk with you to the bus stop. You guys get on this bus?
Yeah.
So if you were going to vote, what is the thing that's going to get your vote?
Probably school and expensive.
I was going to say, you're not talking about the issues that people talk about on the news all the time. The Russia investigation, the Supreme Court. You don't watch that stuff?
I don't watch news.
Are you registered to vote?
Not yet.
Not yet. How old are you?
18.
18. So this could be your first election.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you could decide whether or not the House of Representatives is in Democratic or Republican control. Are you thinking about all that?
Not currently. Maybe if I took more time to get informed about what's going on right now in politics. I assume that the people voting have at least some idea of who they're voting for.
Are you going to vote?
I should. We're the most unreliable voter demographic, so I should vote to increase those numbers,
Well, that's what the Democrats want. But they can't count on you guys necessarily.
No.
No.
Slowly, if you keep asking us these questions, the rest of the people our age are going to keep doing it. They're like, oh man, better vote. All the old people are telling us to vote now.
Oh, am I old?
No.
Oh boy. I mean, I it's hard to get people, I think, to tune into this stuff when you're in college. And
well, they should run on the things that the college kids care about, right?
Yeah, but I think it's also just hard to get them to even be aware. I don't know how much any of these folks would even know, that there was somebody suggesting that they're addressing their needs or their interests. I mean, in college, anyways, I think people are far, just not necessarily engaged in the same way. I mean, I think for some students,
It's it almost feels like they're too young. I mean, I know people are adults technically at 18, but like a lot of these kids, especially freshmen, they were just under their parents' house roof like last year. Like they're still figuring stuff out. Like I don't expect much from, and they don't even, and to be honest, like the student loan stuff hasn't even really kicked into them.
Right.
That's not even real at
Oh
that
yeah.
point.
Yeah, you know what radicalized me and made me politically active? Trying to survive on my own in the world.
Well, yeah. That's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. I mean, everybody's at camp there on some level, and the thing about camp is it's sort of like dream time. You don't deal with the same stuff. Now, I'd be interested in an 18-year-old who's not in college, and be more curious as to how much attention they're paying, or how much they have a list of issues, or a 19-year-old. 18 is very difficult. By the time these folks are 22, they're going to have a better sense of at least what their agenda set is. That said, we just saw Jacob Soboroff in the OC. This report from BuzzFeed News. So Taylor Swift, and look, I'm not going to lie to you folks. If Taylor Swift was sitting in this office right now, I would be like, Jamie, is that a friend of yours? Matt, what's
oh my
going
God,
on?
you have a daughter.
I do have a daughter, but my daughter does not play Taylor Swift. I can tell you that right now.
My little cousin's a big fan.
If Cardi B was in here, I'd know about it.
Wow.
But Taylor Swift, sorry, don't know her. And apparently, Taylor Swift has broken the hearts of alt-right writers and conservatives who are desperately, always on the lookout, desperate for anyone in show business, as much as they hate it when anybody in show business speaks out, or when Hollywood or musicians or whatever it is, whenever they speak out, all that just melts away if they say something nice about conservatives or conservatism, or I guess the conservative icons like Donald Trump. And my understanding is that Taylor Swift, and I will say I do not have first-hand knowledge of this, had to ask, has not been very political at all in her public career. She didn't say anything during the 2016 elections, and just by the fact that she didn't say anything, conservatives considered her one of them.
Oh yeah, she's their Aryan princess.
Is it
she has a big alt-right following.
Is it because she looks like an Aryan?
I think
Can you
that's
put
a
up a
part of
picture
it.
of Taylor
Yeah, hold
Swift?
on.
I mean, do we have one? Because I honestly...
Yeah, they're trying to find like coded stuff in her music that's like alt-right. It's ridiculous.
And they've been doing this for years.
Yeah.
Okay. And then so she comes out the other day with a post on Instagram and basically said that you should vote, that Marsha Black... Okay. All right. There she is. No idea. Don't think I've ever seen her before in my entire life.
God bless you.
And she came out and said she's apparently lives in Tennessee. Is that right? And she went to say that she could not bring herself to vote for Republican Representative Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee's U.S. Senate race because her voting record in Congress appalls and terrifies me. She voted against the Reauthorization of Violence Against Women Act. She voted against equal pay for women. She believed businesses have a right to refuse service to gay couples. She also believes they should not have the right to marry. These are not my Tennessee values.
What does she have against free enterprise?
Instead, she put her support with Phil Bredesen and Democratic Representative Jim Cooper. She encouraged her followers to make sure they registered to vote before Tennessee's October 9th deadline, which is today. Go to vote.org and you can find all the info. Oh, hey. Wow. I think I know the chair of the Tennessee Democratic Party. Mary Mancini, said, to have someone of her stature with such a large microphone step up and actually reinforce what we already know here is definitively going to boost the morale of people who have been told Tennesseans are divisive. Apparently, Vote.org saw Tennessee registrations spike specifically since that post. They received 5,100, almost 5,200 in the state so far this month. And 2,100 were in the last 36 hours. Up from 2,800 in the entire month of September. So that's pretty big. And the site had seen a big jump in the number of visitors since Swift's post. Wow.
She should have made it a walk away, though. She should have said, I used to be conservative.
That would have been much more
missed a
intense.
trick.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, she used to care more about her bottom line than making a political
Now,
statement.
Phil Bredesen apparently is in some trouble in Tennessee since the Kavanaugh nomination, since basically he came out in support of it. He was leading in the polls, and when he came out in support of it, of Kavanaugh, since that time it's gone down. Now, it's unclear to me. It's tough to disaggregate these things, but we'll see. We'll see if Taylor Swift breaks the hearts of conservatives. My understanding is that my good friend Charlie Kirk is very upset about this. He was all over the place, and I don't know if that'll come up in the debate in a week and a half at Politicon. But
yeah, if Trump's helping the middle class so much, why did Taylor Swift endorse a Democrat?
There you go.
Well, it was kind of a power move on Katy Perry's part. If you'd like to know the history of why Taylor Swift didn't jump on the Hillary bandwagon sooner, Katy Perry.
Are you being facetious?
No.
Oh, God.
No. Oh, my God. I used to be like a pop culture blogger. I still know way more about this stuff than I want to. But they had a little feud, Taylor and Katy. They were kind of competitive. And Katy Perry, in one of the smartest things she's ever done, jumped on the Hillary bandwagon first and was like appearing at her rallies and stuff. So then Taylor Swift, like, what was she supposed to do? She wasn't going to campaign for Trump.
Interesting. Didn't realize that was the dynamic.
Yeah. I will, you know what? Now that Taylor Swift has finally broken her silence about politics, despite my, skepticism of the Democratic Party, I'm going to come out. I have been known on occasion to enjoy a song or two by Taylor Swift.
Well, there you go. Well, here's the problem. Donald Trump responded to Taylor Swift. And Taylor Swift, of course, like I said earlier, has increased voter registration, has broken the hearts of all right-wingers. And here is Donald Trump. It is significantly diminished Donald Trump's appreciation for Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, now that she's in politics. Taylor Swift jumping into politics. What do you have to say to her? And what did she say? She said she wants people to vote for Democrats. And not Marsha Blackburn, especially.
Well, Marsha Blackburn is doing a very good job in Tennessee. She's leading now substantially, which she should. She's a tremendous woman. I'm sure Taylor Swift has nothing or doesn't know anything about her. And let's say that I like Taylor's music about 25% less now, okay?
There he goes.
That's still pretty good.
Still 75% supportive of her, despite the fact that she's actively campaigning against, his retaining the power in the Senate.
She's a great songwriter.
Yeah, I guess I got to listen to one of her songs.
I got to say, I like Kanye's music about 75% less than I used
that right?
to. Yeah. So
All right.
I know how he's thinking about these things.
Well, I think these things balance out. Let's go to the IMs. Winnipeg Craig. Everybody's at camp seems like an obnoxious way to talk about younger university students, Sam. These kids are constantly being told they're responsible for saving the earth and stopping school shootings by half of the country, the ones they've given up trying themselves, and called idiots by the other half. Give the kids a break. I am giving them a break. They're at camp.
And they should not be given the responsibility of saving us from climate change or gun violence.
Right. That's what I'm saying. You're at camp. You're not at the the worries of the world are not there. That's the best thing about camp.
Having been a college kid, that's why I'm saying that. I know where I was just in terms of knowledge about the world my freshman year.
Exactly. I'm saying the same thing. Bang Bart, as an alumni of UC Irvine, I can tell you that it's the least political campus in Southern California, maybe the entire West Coast. So I wouldn't take that MSNBC segment as a political litmus test for the average American college students. That I would also agree with. In fact, I know someone who taught there, and she would have said the similar thing. And my experience at other colleges are much more in touch. But some kids...
well, wasn't Berkeley a no-go zone?
Well, that's true. UCI is a majority STEM majors. I was undergrad there during the peak of the Iraq invasion. There wasn't even a booth on campus protesting it. Everyone there is programmed to get a degree and make money. That's it. Also, question for Jamie. Is Molly Crabapple still friends with the famous Nazi hacker Weave?
No, I do not think so.
They had a falling out. Apparently, Seb Gorka is still alive and kicking, and I'm always glad to hear that. But he has, I suggest, found that he's probably not going to be going on his TV as much, so probably shaves a little bit less. I certainly know that's the way I react to it.
I didn't have my Harry's razors.
But of course, there's always Fox and Friends. I'll go on that. Somebody tune up my... What is he wearing? What is it? What is the pin he's wearing here? Why is he wearing a pin? What is the pin? What is he doing that he wears a lapel pin?
I believe that would be his father's or grandfather's Vitesse Rend.
Is that still the Vitesse Rend
I
thing?
assume so.
I'm still proud of being from Nazi heritage. But, here he goes. His parents suffered under Nazi fascism. He's both wearing the fascistic medal and complaining about them.
It's so he never forgets.
Exactly.
There is only one party that has normalized violence in America in the last 2 years, and it's not the Republicans. Let's remember, James Hodgkinson did not wear a MAGA hat when he went to that baseball field in Arlington. He was a Bernie Sanders supporter, went there with an automatic rifle and a pistol with a hit list of what? Republican congressmen, and he almost killed one of them, Steve Scalise. You look at the violence of Antifa, they go prepared for battle to those demonstrations. The right doesn't do that.
Pause it. I mean, wait, what? What? Is that all he says? Honestly, the right doesn't do that? Well, let's just look at Gorka himself. Then we could go on to pictures of Proud Boys, the little brown shirts who show up there, of the neo-Nazis who marched in Charlottesville, one of whom was just, I think, convicted of beating somebody. Also, I don't know if people remember, but a woman was killed by a neo-Nazi there. But here's Gorka himself talking to a press person back when he had his trademark goatee.
Vice President Pence is going to bump my speed. Okay, good. Media reporter. Right. Yeah.
Oh, almost hit him.
You know what? There are problems when you actually control the White House.
He just shoves him and... But I mean, it's laughable, the story they're telling themselves. And Mitch McConnell talking about how senators were literally subjects of violence. Interesting that nobody called the cops. It's weird, right?
The depths they'll sink. They'll even disrupt a meal.
They'll disrupt a meal. Why don't you call the cops? If you don't report it right at that moment, it couldn't possibly happen. Isn't that the story we were told? What? Seb Gorka, ladies and gentlemen, still alive and kicking. All right, let's just... I know this is going to be difficult for people because everybody gets disgusted now when they hear Brett Kavanaugh. But here is Brett Kavanaugh pledging to be independent and impartial. This is what you want out of your Supreme Court justice. You want him to, or her, him if it's a Republican appointee, obviously, him or her to be impartial, to rise above the political fray, right? To not get caught up in the politics are one part of our American life. Party disputes are another part of it. But when you're a judge, all that just goes away. And listen to how he expresses that.
Article 3 of the Constitution provides that the judicial power shall be vested in one Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is an institution of law. It is not a partisan or political institution. The justices do not sit on opposite sides of an aisle. We do not caucus in separate rooms. The Supreme Court is a team of 9, and I will always be a team player on the team of 9.
Yes. Now, he also knows that he's going to be in the 5 of the 4. But let's put that aside. I don't want to be cynical. The same 5 I don't want to be cynical, because what he's espousing there, I believe, is that he is going to put aside all of the rancor from the committee hearings. He's not going to. It's not about things like, how he got there or whatnot. He understands the political process. He's not going to hold any grudges.
No hard feelings.
He's got no hard feelings. It's not a team. It's not team politics. This is just about being a judge. So he's not going to. He's moved on from the process, right? He doesn't blame anybody or anything like that. But wait a second. The speech continues.
I thank the members of the United States Senate, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, for his leadership and steady resolve. I thank Judiciary Committee Chairman Chuck Grassley for his wisdom and fairness. And I give special gratitude to Senators Rob Portman, Susan Collins, Joe Manchin, John Kyle, and Lindsey Graham. They are a credit to the country and the Senate. I'll be forever grateful to each of them and to all the senators who carefully considered my nomination.
Oh, he qualified that. It wasn't all the senators. I thought he was going to say to all the senators who were doing their job. But no, in fact, he's basically saying in almost a polite way, F you to all you senators who voted against me.
Yeah, well, if they didn't vote for him, then they clearly didn't consider it carefully.
Yeah, well, I mean, the point being that this is not a guy who's showing any judicial temperament, even after winning, right? This is the easiest thing in the world to do, is to come up after you win and say, I understand there is political rancor. That is part of the territory. It's not pleasant, but I understand that's part of the process, and I appreciate all senators for doing their job. That is the way even a normal, just a baseline normal judge who cares about just his own legacy and the legacy of the institution of the judiciary would respond. Even if it was completely disingenuous. That if you had one shred of respect for the judiciary, you would come out and say, I have to be magnanimous here because I don't want the people of this country to believe that one of 9 people sitting on the highest court in the land that makes a fundamental decision about the power of government and the rights of of American citizens is in any way biased or holding grudges against political parties or entities who may or may not have supported me. That would be the baseline for someone who has even iota of judicial temperament. And even in winning, this snivelly little privileged man couldn't even work that up.
Well, he's showing what these people are really like, right? Like, if Trump had nominated somebody with the exact same horrible politics, but maybe a better manner, people might still think that the Supreme Court is an apolitical body, when in fact, it's clearly not.
Are there advantages to it? I suppose. I mean, I suppose until we start seeing those hearings. If someone was going to vote exactly the way this guy was, but this is an indication that this guy may be even worse in some of these instances. I mean, we don't know. There's no way to know. I mean, in a perfect world, we would have the ability to divine, how is one person going to vote versus another. But this is indicative of someone who clearly had no judicial temperament. And it is a reflection on exactly who the Republican Party is, because they saw this in this guy. He's parading it in public.
Well, they're sore
Can't
winners.
tell me that he has, well.
It's all about the politics of aggrievement, right?
Indeed.
Like, even when they're winning, they still need something to be pissed off about. Otherwise, they can't whip up the base.
Indeed. And this guy's being overtly political in the same speech where he's saying that we're supposed to be not political. Calling from an 814 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Margaret calling from Erie.
Margaret from Erie. Welcome to the program.
Thank you. I have a couple horrible things to report. The first one is that Trump is coming here tomorrow for a rally.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I know. And the second horrible thing is that Sebastian Gorka is coming here, let's see, November 7th to discuss, God knows what he's going to discuss. He's coming to this Jefferson Educational Society's Global Summit.
What did you guys do in Erie that you deserve this?
Well, to be fair, he's not the only person on the bill. I mean, we had Wendell Potter, for example, came.
Okay.
I guess this summit is trying to be inclusive, but I don't know whether to contact them in protest or go heckle him.
I would
way to go.
I would heckle him. But
okay.
I mean, that's what I would do. But
all right, I will, and I'll call back and let you know how that goes.
Thank you, Margaret.
The other thing I wanted to mention, I'm a mother of 3 adult children, and I have to admit that I have ongoing angst about their future, specifically because of climate change. And I found this organization that I'm going to join. It's called Mothers Out Front. I would urge all mothers, Jamie included, I know you're not a mother, but to check it out. I feel like I have to do something.
Right.
I want my legacy to reflect that I didn't just die in utter denial, that I did try to do something. So I encourage your listeners to check that out.
All right. Well, Margaret, be careful if you do heckle. But thank you for the call.
You bet, Sam. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good for you for getting involved.
Calling for, you mean in terms of the mothers out front, not the heckling part?
Both.
Calling from a 585 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Sam. This is Rebecca from Boonville. How are you?
Hi, Rebecca. What's on your mind?
So I wanted to, first of all, just share that a couple of years ago I was deeply into and investigating climate change, and I had to actually stop looking at all the documentaries for a while because it was too terrifying. So we're all going to die. But on a more positive note, you mentioned Blackburn running in Tennessee. Well, we've got an equally dismal and horrific representative by the name of Claudia Tenney. And I am very active campaigning for Anthony Brindisi, who is running against her in New York the 22nd. And I want to remind people, if you live in New York State, that October 12th is the last day to register people You talked about college students. So my youngest is 18, and he just started school at a SUNY college. And I, as his mother, made sure he got registered. I made sure he had his absentee ballot application in, both he and his girlfriend. He is well aware of what's going on and excited about voting for the first time. So, as Democrats with kids that are in college, harass your kid, explain to them just how important all this is, and get them out there. But in the meantime, get out and protest and all that. But more importantly, get out and volunteer for a campaign. Brindisi is not accepting any corporate money, so we're behind on money, but he's actually leading Tenney in the polls.
Wow.
Because of his, because he's got an amazing campaign staff, full actually of college students. They're wonderful young people.
Can we
even in our small town of.
We'll put a link in the podcast description to that candidate, so people want to check him out.
Yep. It's Brindisi for Congress.
All right.
.com. So, yeah.
All right, Rebecca. Well, thank you very much. October 12th.
Yep, you take care.
All right, bye-bye.
Yep.
Yeah, folks, if you have not registered, or if anyone you know in your family or friends has not registered, today is the last day to register in 15 states. So call them, get on it right now. This is an ad. Richard Linklater was, for me, Slackers was like one of the seminal movies that I saw that influenced me back in the day. And so this ad, I don't know. It is just Richard Linklater made it.
Is it just like 2 hours of people rambling about life and the universe?
Well, we'll see. I feel like you could do 2 hours of Ted Cruz on Ted Cruz, but this is an ad about Ted Cruz, directed by Richard Linklater.
Somebody left something on my door the other day. It said, Ted Cruz, toughest Texas. I mean, come on. If somebody called my wife a dog and said my daddy was in on the Kennedy assassination, I wouldn't be kissing their ass. You stick a finger in their chest and give them a few choice words. Or you drag their ass out by the woodshed and kick their ass, Ted. Come on. Ted.
Political ad paid for by FEC PAC, not authorized by any candidate or candidates.
Oh, I love that. You know what I like about that ad is it's so clearly trolling. Like there's like a wink in here, like, we know this, we're pretending. You know we're pretending, but you can't say we're pretending because you're pretending. Here is that moment that Ted Cruz pretended, where and someone caught the sidearm. So Ted Cruz is talking right to camera. I want to talk right to camera. Of course, what he didn't realize is somebody was also shooting him from the side when following this. Let's just remind people what that was.
I don't get angry often. But you mess with my wife, you mess with my kids, that'll do it every time. Donald, you're a sniveling coward, and leave Heidi the hell alone.
So will you support him as the nominee?
I'm going to beat him for the nomination.
That's not answering the question, Senator.
I am answering the question. Donald Trump will not be the nominee.
He's leading right now. You just
Donald
looked in that
Trump
camera
will
and
not
said
be
he
the
is a
nominee.
coward. Will you support him as the nominee?
Donald Trump will not be the nominee.
There you go. What a man of character. God. He wrote the Time 100 blurb? Ted Cruz did? Wow.
That's actually almost the scariest thing about Ted Cruz, is that he's willing to endure something so shameful as that moment and just continue on his
That is the
trajectory.
entire, it seems to me, sort of like Republican project. It's like, it doesn't matter. There is no shame involved in any of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
None.
That was a big Nixon thing. He would think about it as like anxiety, like this is a very pressure-packed moment, but really he was just being horrible and everybody hated him for it, but that's just part of the job.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
They closed the ranks, man. They're an ideologically unified party. Democrats could learn something from that.
I guess. I mean, they have a pretty narrow ideology. It's just to put money in their pocket and keep it from other people.
Yeah.
Here is Donald Trump announcing Brett Kavanaugh to the world. This is number 2. And, I mean, Brett Kavanaugh goes on to say how we shouldn't be political or partisan or any way. Honestly, a Supreme Court justice with just an ounce of shame would basically say, yeah, I just want to say, I appreciate the job the senators are doing. But no, that's not the way it works in this regime. I mean, you could sort of see, how things can slip, right, on some level. Now we have reports coming out. There's a New York Times report on all the tax shenanigans the Trump family has been involved with for decades, and then the extreme money laundering that followed that. And you can ask people, you can sort of project out, in 20, 30 years, how did people vote for a guy who is clearly a criminal? How is it that there were other people in government who basically just lined up and didn't sort of step away and say, I don't want to be tainted by this? And you can sort of see slowly how this happens, right? Even in this era where there's such scrutiny. Imagine an earlier era where it's there's no 24-hour news, there's no internet, newspapers, are far and few between. That type of stuff you could see, much easier to understand how it's happening now. But even with the amount of scrutiny that we have, we're watching it sort of unfold in real time. But here is Donald Trump scolding the Democrats for having advice and consent for a guy who there was very, very credible allegations of him being an attempted rapist. Now, to be fair to Donald Trump, he also has a lot of credible allegations of sexual assault against him. But
I would like to begin tonight's proceeding differently than perhaps any other event of such magnitude. On behalf of our nation, I want to apologize to Brett and the entire Kavanaugh family for the terrible pain and suffering you have been forced to endure. Those who step forward to serve our country deserve a fair and dignified evaluation, not a campaign of political and personal destruction based on lies and deception. What happened to the Kavanaugh family violates every notion of fairness, decency, and due process. Our country, a man or a woman, must always be presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty.
And if we've got to prevent the investigation into that guilt or innocence, then there you go.
And with that, I must state that you, sir, under historic scrutiny, were proven innocent. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, obviously a blatant lie. But this is the way that, sort of that extreme form of propaganda. It was like back in the day where it was oh, this is propagandistic. And you could argue about it and you could sort of, and then to start to see it so in lacking its nuance is a little bit scary. And of course, we're all well, yeah. But we all know he's full. But then you start to remember, oh, yeah, that's what I mean. It's getting a little scary, folks, to just watch. Because it's not just when Trump doesn't. It's not just when his cabinet members. When you start seeing the third branch of the government sort of buy into that stuff too.
I feel like it makes me think of that Lee Atwater quote where you used to be able to say the N-word and then you have to say welfare and stuff. it feels to me like we've reached a moment in communications technology that they've just decided, like, they had been trying to clean their act up for a while, and now they're starting to slip because they're like, no, we can't do this anymore, right? Like, and I think partially because this stuff is so widely covered, right? Like, it's easy to get a clip of everything and share it because there's the internet now, whereas like it can't just disappear.
I'm not sure I follow you. What do you say?
Basically, like, there's a lot more media exposure, right? It's not just a few news channels. So as exposure was rising with like cable channels or whatever, they started trying to clean their act up a little bit.
Right.
But now there's just too much exposure, right? They can't clean their act up enough, so they're just going the other way and like seeing like what's the point of even
flood
trying
the
to-
zone.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, this general strategy is not new, right? Like you were talking about Edmund Burke the other day. This goes back to the French Revolution and probably before that, making the oppressors look like the victims. That's conservatism.
Yes, I think that's true. But the way in which they're doing it now, feels a little bit more naked to me. At least in the context of my experience within politics. I mean, I'm sure there's historical precedent for stuff like this, but in terms of like my direct experience of it, this is pretty intense. There was always at least some type of like facade, like some type of nuance. And
Well, they also didn't have cable news back then.
right. But they had cable news under the Bush administration. And they still had to pretend, right? Like they still had to pretend a little bit. I am Sock. Ivanka Trump followed DARPA Army chiefs all yesterday, the day before Nikki Haley announced her resignation. The implication being that she would be appointed. That's possible. Casey, Jamie, should I join the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World? Why or why not?
Oh, I need to know way more about you to answer that question. But generally speaking, I like the WOBs. I think they're good. We just plugged an event of theirs on the Antifada the other day. So, yeah, go for it. I myself am a part of DSA, so, you could join them too if you want.
Don't tell MBS the WAPO author's dead. I don't get it. Oh, don't tell the MBS. Oh, okay. This is about this is about the Saudi king, I guess. I don't know. MBS.
Yeah, don't tell Mohammed bin Salman that the author's dead. I think the writer's dead. I think he probably knows.
So after Susan Collins met with survivors before the Kavanaugh speech and was teary-eyed and was begged not to vote for Kavanaugh, can we check if Collins had a history of childhood animal abuse or fire starting? Because that's sociopath stuff. Christo, despite the rather depressing content in today's first half, I offer fun half salutations a day in advance to Jamie and Brendan on the occasion of their first anniversary on the Majority Report. Is that right?
I guess it is.
Is that right?
I think technically it's been a year since then, but I was out for
I started in October.
Okay. Wow.
Time
we have
flies.
a little celebration tomorrow. Trump change. Wondered why I was spending breakfast contemplating the incongruous career of Tony Orlando, and then figured out that it was because I was excited about listening to MR today. Tie yellow ribbon, y'all. Wait, no. Where is that? Oh. Dog Lobster. Have you guys heard about the relationship between Brett Kavanaugh's dad and John Roberts?
Yeah, vaguely.
No.
Let's look further into this.
I don't know. Albion Ninja. Lawrence Lessig is starting a new podcast. You should all reach out and have him on again. Also, any thoughts on grand design versus incremental change? Sometimes I think we're living a sunk cost bias and really need a massive global cooperative effort to redesign our way of life to truly address all our issues, since many of them are interconnected.
I agree.
Lenny Bruce collapsed veins. Hey, your guy really got his math wrong. Any idiots knows that 40 degrees Celsius equals 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Therefore, the scales are exactly the same. Tim Foyle hat trick. I'm becoming more convinced the oligarchs and power players of the world have given up on doing anything about climate change. I think they've built their huge underground facilities with the plan to just abandon the majority of the population to the surface, or to live or die as peasants for their underground feudal strongholds. Yeah, I mean, maybe, but that doesn't seem like that fun, right? I mean, if you could save the planet, why wouldn't you? It's not like it's going to cost them anything. Analusia. It's okay, Sam. I'll send you all the hugs and kisses you need to feel love through the apocalypse. That's very nice. Thank you. Heather, if you really want to make a difference, you should get into pop music. Taylor Swift got 65,000 people to register to vote overnight with one Instagram post. Kanye did us a favor by muddying up politics with his celebrity feuds.
Who'd have thunk at this late date that Taylor Swift would be coming out for Democrats and Kanye West would be coming out for Republicans?
Hey, girl, swipe right, says Sam's Tinder profile. I know the difference between Celsius and Fahrenheit. JJ Cool, why are Americans against the metric system? Also, who would you like to see replace Haley?
I'm not against the metric system.
I'm not either. Oh, that's right.
I'm agnostic on the metric system.
Brendan's a Chafee would have won.
I mean, who would I like to see replace Haley? There's not going to be anybody from the Trump administration I'm going to be happy about replacing Haley. It's going to be worse because Pompeo and Bolton are going to be basically in charge.
How about a Republican in a vulnerable seat?
Yeah, exactly.
Ivanka.
Yeah, Marsha Blackburn. Do you see? We say elections have consequences. We also say that the Obama administration overlooking torture and white-collar crimes for 8 years has had consequences. Putting another Clinton forward as a successor at the end of 8 years of unfulfilled promises, like closing Guantanamo prison and ending wars, had consequences. It's almost like they planned to have Trump win. Yeah, no, I don't think they did. Do you see? New York Times had the power to report on Trump's crimes 3 years ago. Epic intentional fail. Why would the New York Times be reporting on Donald Trump so intensely 3 years ago? I mean, this has been a year in the making, this investigation, at least. The real question is not the New York Times. The real question is, how is it that the FBI didn't get this guy? How is it that this guy has been operating with basic impunity, it seems like, for decades, and they're this corrupt? You know my theory. This is not just run-of-the-mill wealthy people get by. And I don't even think it's just $25,000 to Cyrus Vance either. Felix Sater was an asset, and he was working for Trump. So Trump, whether he knew it or not, was basically the cover story for an asset.
Maybe the reason Trump ran for president was it was the only way he could get out of this tax mess. Ever think about that?
I think he ran for president because it was going to make him money.
That too. Well, that would also, I mean, that would certainly hurt
He wasn't
his
in any
pocketbook.
mess. That was the thing, is he wasn't in any mess.
He went to jail for tax fraud. I mean, he got to pick his own auditor at the IRS, basically, right?
Well, after the fact,
Yeah.
sure. Why wouldn't you? But I think that has more to do with the Mercers picking that auditor than anything else. I think Donald Trump must think he's completely untouchable because it appears as if he was. And he probably thought it was because of him. I have a feeling he was completely unwitting.
Yeah, that's fair.
But nobody calls Sean Hannity.
Sweating. It seems like the Kavanaugh nomination has given a boost to a handful of mostly Senate Republicans. Do you think the Kavanaugh motivation factor for the GOP will wear off by midterm election day? Yes, I do. I actually think that it... I explained this yesterday. In the House, it's because there are House seats that are more purple that will flip. The Senate, you're looking at blood red states, but I do think that the net will be Kavanaugh supporters are not as intense about voting. M&M, a candidate that talks about canceling student debt and cares about climate change. That was Stein, 2016. It was also, I think it's possibly Bernie
Well, that should tell you about the feasibility of the Green Party, because even if she had those policies, it didn't lead to.
Well, I'm not saying
the
that those
youth
policies are going to get you to win. I just think that my point was that I think that if climate change is fixed, I should say addressed by our government in the short term, it's going to be as a bank shot. It's not going to be because someone's running as an environmental candidate, because it's clear that climate change is never going to be the first issue
Well,
why people vote.
Don't say never.
Well, not in the short term.
It might be coming sooner than we think.
It's very possible, but then we're not in the short term anymore. We're in the it's too late term. But left-handed lefty. Sam, read Climate Chaos Talking Points. The potential average degree changes idea is completely abstract to most everyone, which allows it to be trivialized and distorted. As your guest mentioned today, economic losses may be a better metric to highlight. GIS property analysis would say how many billions of dollars could be devalued by each successive foot of sea rise. Well, here's the funny part about what you wrote is like you talked about degree changes to be trivialized and distorted because they're so abstract. And then what you said after that, I barely understood what you were saying. But to the extent that I could, it's completely abstract. You know, like property devaluation by billions of dollars is a super abstract concept, except for maybe those specific homeowners, but it's not abstract for them. That's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think that there is a way within the 10 years that we're looking at to make people perceive climate change is relevant to them enough to motivate them to vote. That's just my guess. I think you got to do a bank shot.
Well, that's assuming that Democrats are even running on policies that would do anything about it.
No, that's not assuming that. It's assuming that anybody would be. Whether it's Jill Stein or the Democrats or the Republicans, I just don't think there's ever, or Bernie, it doesn't matter. I don't think that the voters are going to respond to that. I just don't think that. I think it's just too abstract for them.
Well, I guess we'll see, or maybe we won't.
Right. James Boach. Hi, Sam. I've been listening and a member for about 5 years now. I'm reaching out because my wife and I had a baby boy recently. Could you please send me send some time on how to discuss politics with children as they grow up? When did you start? With how complicated issues can get, how can I break it down? Of course, from a left perspective. I talk more about civics with Mila, who's now 13, than I do the specifics of politics. And with Saul, I just try and teach him to be a decent person and let them fill in the specific issues later. They don't, it's like, it's not relevant to my kids that Brett Kavanaugh doesn't appreciate the Chevron doctrine. But I can, talk to Mila about like what the role of government should be, broadly speaking. Or like she's doing now, like history. I'm trying to get her to listen to some of the podcasts that we've done about Reconstruction and whatnot. But it may be a bit of a reach.
Tell her to listen to Antifada. It's more fun.
I may do that. Calling from a 575 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello, this is the Black African Libertarian again.
Black African Libertarian again. And where are you calling from?
I'm calling from New Mexico, sir.
And what's on your mind?
What's on my mind is I just called to maybe give a little bit of good news to everyone about climate change, and let everyone know that over 30% of U.S. oil and gas is owned and nationalized by the Department of Interior. The other 15 to 20% is owned and nationalized by state governments in the United States, and that our agencies are taken over, whether we have a Supreme Court or not that's for or against us, there are actually positive policies that we can use to deploy these resources that are already in the hands of the U.S. government to as a revenue stream, which they already are, directly into investing in green technologies and greening up our economy.
I mean, it sounds like to me, in terms of the timing, that using these sources as revenue streams is part of the problem, even more than it is a solution, right? Like, the idea is to just to shut down the wells.
Well, here's the thing. I'm not saying that. I'm not. I would personally kind of disagree with that because it only took in the 1930s and 40s, it only took about 10 years to deploy the West Texas oil fields, and it would only take about 10 to 15 years to shut down the oil production. And I mean, it doesn't shut down in a day, and that's a revenue stream that cannot be taken away by the regulatory framework, because it's already deployed into the system as a revenue stream. And as you use that money to invest, you can shut down fields one by one. I mean,
I see what you're saying. I mean, I see what you're saying. It's possible. I mean, okay.
And the thing is that a lot of this could be done directly by.
But what we could also do. You know what we could also do is we could say we're going to shut down those. We're going to shut those down as soon as we just expend cash to replace them. So you don't even have to wait for them. I mean, I guess.
I would agree with that. And go ahead, sir.
No, I see what you're saying. I mean, I think, yeah, possibly. I'd need to sort of, dig into it more. But I guess theoretically,
the only reason that I would say that we shouldn't announce that we're shutting them down is because it would cause a huge rift throughout the markets, because and it would affect the price of oil. Now, you could just do it, but you can't just announce that you're doing it. And all these things are possible, and they're possible with the right, because you can do this by presidential decree. You wouldn't even have to do it by through Congress, pretty much. The only issue to the viewers is that we would have to have somebody in office who has the will to do this, and then we will have to expect that the courts will go after this lock, stock, and barrel as soon as it happens. But I mean, one of the big problems that I had with maybe the guest is that when you're talking about climate change, we have to talk about climate change, and then we have to talk about the energy crisis in a programmatic way of how to deploy it. We have to give people a programmatic approach to understand how we can policy-wise fix these things. And that's what I think the problem with the left is that we're just not offering people a vision of how to.
I guess. I mean, I appreciate the call.
Speak for yourself.
I appreciate the call. I know what you're saying, but I think the bottom line is I think there are plans out there. I think we just haven't gotten there. But maybe you're right that presenting. But yes, Jamie's plan would be end capitalism and growth. But I understand what your argument is, and I think there are those plans. I think there's just like a concern that maybe bringing that out is premature, but maybe not. All right, let's do one final call of the day. Call from a 201 area code. Who's this? Two 201. Who's this? Go on. Let's try 919. Did I get it? Calling from a 919 area code.
Hey there, can you hear me?
Yep. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is David from Raleigh.
David from Raleigh. What's on your mind?
So I haven't called all your shows recently, so maybe you've been knocking it out. But I've been really worried about registration, and probably because I can see internally how it was kind of an impediment with myself. Just feeling committed to vote, basically. First off, I think everybody listening right now should check their registration. That's something that I took too long to do, and I had a little trouble finding out if I was registered, so that kind of took me down to another concern that I had, which was, if I'm not registered, same-day registration. And I looked that up in my state, and it looks like there's one-stop registration. So if you're in North Carolina, on October 17th, that's the day where you can register and vote on the same day. And there's got to be some of that in some of the other states in the U.S., and I'm really concerned that, the Democrats just need to be hot and heavy on making sure people are registered, and on top of that, figuring out if there's a way to get them registered. And apparently in my case there is, so I don't have an excuse, is what I'm getting at. And today, as you mentioned, there's 15 states that today is the deadline to be registered, and Texas is one of them. So if you're in Texas and you want to vote Beto, today's the day to get registered. If you don't mind, I'll list the other 14 states very quickly. This is the last day to get registered in these states. Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, New Mexico, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, and Texas. So, yeah, you did good mention that earlier, but I think we need to mention it multiple times that we got to be registered first off, and then if we're not, to figure out how can we get registered, and there is a way in some states.
David, I appreciate your call. Thank you so much, man. Good way to end the calls for the day. And let's go a couple more IMs, then we're out of here. Great leap forward. Students are a depressing demo. However, my daughter at UCSB is registered to vote and has helped several of her friends register as well. Go, Alex. Mac from Maryland. I helped my friends who reside in Pennsylvania to register to vote. The Kavanaugh confirmation was the last straw for her. Great. I guided her through the online registration. Mysteriously, the online portal was unable to confirm her driver's license. She was forced to print it out and mail it in prior to the postmark deadline. And today, they're certainly not making it easier to register to vote these days. Of course not. Vespa, I hope you are as classically smug Sam as possible when going against Mr. Kirk. I'm very much looking forward to this. Left is best. Speaking of camp, I went to an adult-themed camp music festival this weekend called Dirty Bird Camp Out. More adults need a camp party experience like this. I miss my MR crew, though. Left is best. Ben Sassy, I think the court packing needs to be non-negotiable for Democrats, although maybe they shouldn't telegraph that just yet. But bear with me on this. I like this idea of contracting the court by 2 seats on a last-in, first-out basis, and then maybe a year or so later you claim the caseload is too much for 7. The caseload is too much. There should be more judges anyway, so. 3 more. Producer Lauren, back in 2016, the Vice TV show Gaycation with Ellen Page interviewed Jair Bolsonaro. You should check it out. Also, I agree that Taylor Swift did this despite Kanye some more, who I think is getting more influenced by certain log cabin Republican-in-law.
That's a good point.
Matt's number one Stamendent lawyer. Matt's First Amendment lawyer. You'll be hearing from my lawyer. Okay. And the final IM of the day. Hello to Sam and MR crew. I don't know how you feel about cryptocurrency and the mining there, but keeping with today's theme of climate change, there's a good reason to hate it. Turns out mining Bitcoin alone dumps about 17.7 million tons of carbon into the atmosphere.
God.
I heard one observer compare it to the equivalent of 1 million transatlantic flights. Benefits of capitalism. Hashtag. All right, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101 and the 5. Do you know how far the detour takes you? Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the man